This is Tyler Klee, engineer at WTOG CW44 Tampa, Florida. You're watching NAB Show Live, produced by Broadcast Beat.
Live from Las Vegas, this is NAB Show Live, produced by Broadcast Beat. Here's your host, Janet West.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to NAB Show Live. Isn't this a fantastic studio that Broadcast Beat has got? I'm Janet West, and in the next hour, we are going to delve into the issues of post-production, but from three different perspectives of three different companies. Now, they're all facing the arrival of 4K, HDR, growing international collaboration and shifting of data to various parts of the world, and changing workflows. But first of all, let me introduce my celebrated guests. So first of all, Robert Carroll, far right. Robert Carroll is Senior Director, Video Content Solutions at Dolby Laboratories. Robert's career in cinema and television spans more than 36 years. I think it's just a little bit more than me. And as a news and live sports cameraman, then moving into product development, resulting in 5 Emmy award-winning products. Now, prior to Dolby, Robert was CEO of Cinetal, which was acquired by Dolby in 2010. Now, today at Dolby, Robert is responsible for product and post-production solutions for Dolby Cinema and Dolby Vision. Now, in the middle, I should say, we have a flower because we have Janet Lafleur. Janet is Product Marketing Manager at Quantum and is a Silicon Valley technologist focused on storage solutions for big data and media entertainment industry. Janet's special skill is predicting how people will interact with new technologies. And Janet sees major storage disruptions caused by technology and video in the enterprise and higher resolution formats, and digital capture in data and content-intensive industries. And then last, but by no means least, Wolfgang Lemp, who is CEO of Filmlight. Now, Wolfgang Lemp, he co-founded Filmlight with Peter Stothart and Steve Chapman in 2002. And along with other co-founders, he oversees general management of the company, including business and product development, product management and strategic development. Wolfgang, your tech credentials are pretty impressive. A degree in theoretical physics from Munich University, and working in the motion picture industry since, I believe, 1983. Before he was co-founding Filmlight, he was Director of Technology Development at Framestore, CFC, and prior to that, Systems Architect for the FX Center in Babelsberg in Germany, and Director of Technology of the Computer Film Company, where he led the development of pioneering digital and image processing. Right, so this is going to be an interesting show. We've got a lot of new things that are going to be shown, and a lot of changes with 4K and HDR. So Wolfgang, let me ask you, what are you expecting to see that's different, and is there going to be a lot of disruption in workflow?
Well, the workflow always lags behind the technology in some ways, not because people are obstinate or anything, but it always requires that technology is actually working together between different vendors and in different parts of the process, and that's surprisingly difficult to organize. But we are now at a point where you see real progress in making things easier in terms of adopting new workflows. And I think 4K is a case in point, which has been around since the very beginnings of my involvement in the industry, which is, as I said, going back to '83. I remember a presentation I did more than 20 years ago about 4K and whether it was worth it in terms of the additional data and what the viewing experience was. And at the time, everybody said, well, you only see it in the first 2 rows of the cinema and everything else is irrelevant. But over the 20 years or so, things have really moved on, and we have big displays now at home, and you really see the difference. And because of that long gestation period, people are prepared to deal with it in terms of large files, in terms of display devices, and in terms of the image processing technology.
Okay. Now I understand that, or I was told, that you have a completely fresh approach to color control. What is that, and what is Filmlight's Baselight 5, is it?
Well, our Baselight color grading system has been around now for 14 years. We introduced it first here at NAB, and obviously a huge amount has happened over the years in terms of digital capture, in terms of digital cinema, and in terms of multiple delivery channels, and above all in terms of computing bandwidth and storage bandwidth, and we try to make the most of it as things progress. But one thing that has been a constant going back to the 80s or even before, 70s, is the way color grading has been approached from very much a telecine background, a broadcast background, and we very strongly feel that as we move to high dynamic range, as we move to very capable new digital cameras, that isn't really the paradigm that fits our natural understanding of how images can be best reproduced. And so we thought about how that should be done. And we went right back to the early days of photography. We're talking about zones now, like Ansel Adams. And we try to approach it more from the perspective of the director of photography rather than from the engineering perspective of lift gamma gain that is very much based on the analog amplifiers that could be used at the time, and hasn't really got all that much to do with color.
Right. Is Filmlight doing anything to accurately mimic the way the human eye appreciates color?
Very much so. Complementing our color correction application and systems, we have always had a very strong background in color science and color management. We always felt that there's no point in manipulating images if what you see on the screen isn't really meaningful in another environment. In other words, in the early days it was fine, you had a CRT and you calibrate that in a normal way, and what you saw on the screen was what was broadcast. But as soon as you translate that into cinema or into other display devices, that isn't necessarily true anymore. And so there's a number of aspects to it. One is the different color gamuts of the different devices, the tone curves, but the complement of that is how our eyes work. And it is interesting that there was a lot of research going back 80 years, 60 years, and not much seemed to have happened for a number of decades. But only recently we have been able to, I mean, not we as Filmlight, but the science community has been able to actually fully understand the chemical reactions inside the eye and the underlying physics and the way the nerves work, and a whole number of things have come together there that allows us to approach color and the control of color in a more direct way, a more natural way that makes the changes feel more organic. And we try to convey that in our software.
Anything to add on the color grading side, Robert?
Well, Wolfgang brings up a really great point around the differences between what we do when we're in the color grading suite and all the variety of display devices, playback devices, viewing environments that are in the marketplace where the consumer actually is delivered the final content, especially in the home and portable delivery areas. It's a little less so in theater, where we have a lot more control over those environments. But Filmlight and Wolfgang's company is a great partner with Dolby, and some of the things we're doing around HDR in combination with many other people who are exploring and looking around HDR. And one of the key attributes to that is to try to look at how artistic fidelity can be maintained from the point of the artist setting the image in the environment that he has, to maintaining that all the way to the consumer experience, whether that's in the home, in the theater, on the go, wherever it might be, and adjusting the system. Now that we have a full digital ecosystem that's been in place, we have the ability of actually having a lot better control over how the artistic intent is delivered to the final consumer. And this is really a wonderful opportunity as we move forward to not only create better images with a bigger palette, but ensure that the fidelity of those images are carried through to the viewer of the art.
So to get these improvements in both productivity and creativity, have we got the tools available?
The tools are being introduced and are coming to market as we speak. You'll see a lot of new tools probably on the show floor out here in the coming days. But yeah, there's quite a significant amount of effort being done in HDR, and as Wolfgang can talk about some of the efforts that have happened with Filmlight, at Dolby Vision, we've been building an HDR ecosystem that not only starts at the camera and at the lens, but is actually managing the color and the image fidelity all the way to the consumer. And today we have outlets through OTT providers like Vudu and Netflix that are delivering HDR content to TVs that are actually receiving that content and adjusting it so it can match what the artistic fidelity was in the grading suite. So that is an ecosystem that is online and happening today.
Janet, do you want to add anything to that?
Yes, it's interesting. I come from Quantum, and we're workflow storage, so we're the platform that all of your tools have to be on top of. And there's so many new technologies that are coming out. Is it going to be 4K or 8K or HDR or higher frame rates that people are going to use? And they need to make sure that they can get to the content, the data that they need. And what's interesting mostly to me is we don't always know which of these technologies is going to give the best consumer experience, because it is all over the map. Is it in cinema? Is it on an iPad? And so the people are having to make, in charge of the production, are having to make that decision as to where to put their best bang for the buck. Oh. And then, of course, there's a storage impact. Obviously, when you go from 2K to 4K or 4K to 8K, there's like a ×4 type factor, but people don't know necessarily what is HDR going to mean in terms of how much more storage capacity. Is that better over 2K, or is it better just to go and do a straight 4K? Yeah. These are the questions that people are asking, and they need to make sure that their environment, their post-production workflow at every stage is going to be able to handle it.
So the color grading market has been changing dramatically over the last few years. How do you see it developing in the future? Whoever wants to take that.
Well, I think there's a whole number of areas in which it can go. Yesterday, some of the viewers here might have attended the fantastic presentation as part of the Future Cinema Conference that Ang Lee gave about his Billy Lynn project. And that is a movie that is shot at 120 frames a second, at 4K for both eyes in stereo, and obviously the bandwidth is like 10 times higher than what you normally would have. And we've been involved in that on the color grading side, because obviously you want to be able to do that in an environment that is as close to the viewing conditions that you have in a cinema if it is projected in that way. And what was very interesting there is that their experience of seeing how the acting changes depending on the frame rate and how the dynamics change and what you have to do differently in that environment. And that is something that they openly admitted they didn't have a clue. And it's something that they want to explore and other people want to explore. And I think we have to, at this point, really stand back and say, cinema, as I know it, as a lot of us know it, the kind of dim, flickering experience in a dingy cinema is not the only way and not necessarily the best way of telling a story. But what the best way is, I think it will evolve. It will change from generation to generation. But what is very clear is that in terms of technology, we have now fantastic capabilities in terms of bandwidth, in terms of brightness, and I should mention there that all of that really needs to be experienced. And I think one of the crucial things that happened over the last few years is what Dolby did by saying, we do this regardless of what's out there in terms of infrastructure. We show people how images can really look, and that stimulates people and makes them think there is something that can be done. And I would hope that this can go on for many decades.
For anybody who's interested in learning a little bit more about the 120 frames per second, I interviewed Douglas Trumbull yesterday, and on broadcastbeat.com there will be an interview where he explains about this, not only a new experience of the image, but looking at a different experience in the design of theatres. But we're getting off topic slightly, so let's move back into post-production. Janet, what's new in scaling?
Yeah, so at Quantum, our customers have to deal with scale all the time because of all these new technologies, having these heavier storage requirements. And, you know, the capacities just get out of control, the bandwidth required. But what we're showing at NAB, showcasing, is our new Axelis converged architecture platform, which lets our customers start smaller with a smaller footprint, both in terms of capacity, but also in terms of the physical footprint in the data center, and then grow to the petabyte level. And we do have customers on that full range. And what's also interesting about that is just everything is seeming to converge. We're able to actually run some of the different workflow tools on top of our platform, which we normally hadn't done in the past. So that if you come to our booth, you'll see that we have Aspera and Telestream and some of the media asset managers like CatDV also running within our system. But basically the idea is that just by converging and making things tighter, we keep keeping the efficiencies so that people can produce the content that they want with the beauty that their customers demand.
Right. What about some of the tools for MAM and media asset management and transcoders and automation?
Yes, I mean, StoreNext is a platform, and we work with this extensive partners, ecosystem of partners, and the media asset management is a big portion of that. One of the things we're showing is our new integrations with Avid, so that people working on Avid projects can archive directly from the Interplay MAM, as well as through Marquis and Storage DNA. But I think the thing that it's going to be it's most exciting for me is we have a live demo in a post-production area of a 4K workflow with multi-stream, so really pushing through the content to multiple workstations, running Blackmagic. And then at the same time, we have a visual effects flow going through it on the same, hitting the same hardware, and that's using Autodesk. And what's interesting to me as a geek is that to streaming content and what you need for rendering and playback and visual effects are completely different profiles in terms of performance. And it's an area that StoreNext has gotten stronger in the last few years to be able to do both at the same time.
What I'm seeing here is we're going to be having something slightly different for the cinema. We're having, as you pointed out, Janet, we're going much smaller with everybody with mobile connectivity. This is going to get quite complicated, is it, for the post-production houses to deliver something that, you know, one size fits all?
And that's just it. What they're really going to have to do is deliver to far more platforms with different constraints. And they have to decide, like I mentioned before, is what's going to be best for that platform. And at the same time, the amount of transcoding and delivery they're going to have to do is increased. So one of our newer products is the Lattice, which is an object storage-based archive, where you can do delivery directly from it, basically as objects instead of as files. Because we're finding people are spending a lot more time remonetizing at the same time they're creating content than they had 5 or 10 years ago.
Okay. Robert, let's move on to you and Dolby. Robert, the cinema market, it's been changing an awful lot. We've got more bums on seats, if you like, in the UK, but less bums on seats in Europe. And I think you were pointing out that in China, more people are going to the cinema. So this is really changing. What is, what's actually going to happen? Where is it growing? Where is it declining? And what's Dolby doing to help create, if you like, the wow factor to get people to go to the cinema? We've obviously heard about 120 frames a second. But not all the cinemas will be able to gear up to 120 frames. So with conventional cinemas, what is Dolby doing?
Well, there's a couple of areas that Dolby's focusing on. One is in our audio format and creating a immersive audio through object-oriented audio versus channel-based audio. That's often referred to as Dolby Atmos as our offering there. And that has been rolling out globally to many theaters as an additional wow factor for the consumer. In addition to that, Dolby has started engaging with exhibitors on a Dolby branded cinema. So it's co-branded with the exhibitors. And at those cinemas, we're providing our high dynamic range imaging system, which is a projection system that we developed along with Christie. It's a laser-based system, so it has both high dynamic range as well as a wide color gamut. It creates images that are beyond anything you've ever seen in the cinema before. And so those are wow factors between the immersive audio, providing more of a realistic audio environment, an imaging environment that gets closer and closer to mimicking what we see in the real world. And one of the things that's important here is not so much the fact that these technologies mimic our real world atmosphere or our real world vision, but it becomes a palette for the artists. So where the emotion of the story, where the editing of the story, where it comes together, where that palette becomes important, whether it's a sunset at the forest foreground and you've got to be able to show the dynamic range between the deep grays and the foliage of the forest and the bright blue sky with the sun setting, or whether it's the atmospheric sound of the animals and the things going on in that area that you put around the person. It provides that palette for the artist to really tell the story and bring the person not from a point of viewing something projected on the screen, but into the scene itself, both from an oral and a visual point of view. And these palettes are important to our filmmaking, our artist partners. There was a session yesterday, right before the session on the 120 frame per second Ang Lee items, where Disney and Pixar and ILM and a few others got together and talked about some of the feature animations that were done in high dynamic range and wide color gamut, also using immersive audio, and how that they were able to find areas of their story, emotions in their story, that would not have been there if that palette had not been available to them. So it was very interesting to see how they use that.
So having that palette is actually going to challenge a lot of post-production operators in, the creative side, if you like, to...
It's a transition.
Yeah.
And, we've made this transition many times. We made this transition between standard definition and high definition on both the broadcast side as well as, other video outlet sides. We've made this a transition between film to digital intermediate, as we were talking about with the film scanning.
I'm going to stop you right there because we're going to continue after the break. We are NAB Show Live at NAB 2016. It's been delightful, but stay with us because we're coming back after the break.
Hi, this is Cliff Mitchell, production director for Federated Media in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and you're watching NAB Show Live, produced by Broadcast Beat.
Live from Las Vegas, this is NAB Show Live, produced by Broadcast Beat. Here's your host, Janet West.
Welcome back, everybody, to NAB Show Live. We're having a fascinating conversation about post-production and anything from cinema through with 120 frames per second as to storage. Now, we're going to go over to Adobe to listen to what they have to say. And I was asking him, how much do you think that 4K will disrupt the workflow? We was talking to Patrick Palmer.
So with 4K, I'm not quite sure if you can call it disruptive just when you look at that being more resolution. It gets more interesting once you add Ultra HD definitions to it, like adding high dynamic range, adding higher frames per second, going all the way up to 100 frames per second. Then it becomes a question of not just more storage, more CPU, it becomes a question of the workflows that cater to those outputs and eventually yet again unleashing the creativity. So we keep presenting more tools that allow exactly that, to be more creative within that realm without just thinking about technology. That should stay out of the way as much as possible.
So then I asked him, what changes do you see, or do any of the manufacturers see a post facility having to make to accommodate HDR or 4K?
Well, I guess they will probably have to buy a couple more Creative Cloud licenses, but that joke aside, I'm pretty sure that changes will be subtle. The combination of them will make the difference. I already talked about storage or CPU updating that. Not a big deal, really. Putting it all together so it eventually becomes a pipeline again is the challenge. And we're trying to serve that on the creative side for software by really keeping a range of products that work tightly together and where the handshakes are easy so you can actually really immerse yourself in the creative process rather than thinking about so hard and long how to put the individual pieces together.
And my final question to Patrick was, what was new at Dolby that's solving some of today's workflow problems?
So some of the things we're showing for the first time here at NAB are tools that will help you to indeed either be faster, more productive, or do things you possibly couldn't do before. So a good example for this is a completely new ingest and proxy workflow. That is necessary looking at what's coming up next because, as a matter of fact, we're not necessarily talking 4K. On input, we'll be talking 6K, 8K, maybe even going beyond that. So we're presenting a whole new workflow that not only allows to produce those proxies on ingest and keep working as you do that, but will also allow the user to put that up to Creative Cloud via Creative Sync, so you can work on lightweight devices, another place, another time, or with somebody else. All of those options that just make you collaborate more easily with other people are enabled by that feature.
Very interesting. Just to remind you who are my guests, it's Robert Palmer from Dolby, and it's Janet Lafleur from Quantum, and Wolfgang Lemp from Filmite. What about disrupting the workflow with 4K? Do you think that that's going to happen? And will production teams have to change their day-to-day operations to cope with these new technologies, or will they be able to be seamlessly integrated?
Yeah, I can speak to
Janet,
that.
go ahead.
Basically, 4K theoretically quadruples the amount of bandwidth and storage that you need. And if you're not prepared with the workflow platforms that you have, you may end up kind of, just to get it to work, may actually end up going back to methods of production that were limiting in the past, the infamous silos of direct attached storage, or maybe doing some editing in a proxy format that doesn't really give you the full control that you want. So basically, when you take on these new projects, and usually it's not like we're going to change our whole workflow, all of our projects at once to 4K. Usually it's you're coming in with some new ones. To do it slowly and to stand up new systems that are 4K capable, so that you don't have this problem where you just can't get what you need before and end up going back to old systems and ways of doing things.
Yeah. Robert?
I find it interesting that we're in an industry that now is past 100 years old, between cinema and radio, and we've been on this 100+ year track of continuous evolution and improvement. So this idea of disruption, I almost think is kind of laughable from the viewpoint of we've been disrupting ourselves for over 100 years. We ought to be used to it by now. So, we go from silent to talking films, we go from radio to TV, we go from black and white TV to color TV. This has been ongoing. And so I think the thing that I say is take a deep breath. There's new tools and new technology that are constantly being improved and brought to the table. your customers as a post facility and you as a creative artist will be able to take advantage of those tools. There is a market economic point where it makes sense for you, regardless of where you work in the market, and you just need to adopt. I mean, there's still people today that create and broadcast standard definition TV. Yeah. So it's not something that happens overnight, where tomorrow all your customers are going to walk in and say, if you're not doing 4K HDR at 120 frames per second, I'm going somewhere else. That doesn't happen that quickly. So, you know, work with your vendors like Wolfgang at Filmlight and Quantum and Dolby and all the Adobe and all the other vendors. Give them feedback. Help them make their tools better, breathe deep, we'll all get through this and we'll have another transition, and guess what? Hopefully your career will be long enough, you'll see another one again in your career life.
Wolfgang, some colorists have actually been expressing concern that working with HDR is going to cause some eye strain. What do you feel about that?
Well, I can see that any change is always going to be a bit of a challenge for some people, but the real world is HDR, and then some. And so I don't really accept that this is going to cause a massive problem. It needs getting used to, and I think one of the things that you would naturally do is keep the highlights, the specular highlights, the really bright stuff, at a level where, not at an absolute level, but at a level in terms of how much of the screen it occupies, to the point that it doesn't feel uncomfortable. And I don't think that is such a challenge to achieve, but it's certainly something that we need to learn as artists and as colorists to learn that language and use it to best effect.
Do the workstations have to change to accommodate such, better definition, for example?
Certainly the displays need to be capable of showing the wider color gamut, showing the brighter images and showing the higher resolution. Mm-hmm. And that technology is obviously evolving. It's evolving quite rapidly, and part of that is also that the screens get bigger, as I mentioned earlier on. I think the viewing angle in all of this is an important factor in terms of how immersive is the experience and how do you want to tell the story. But it's these, if you want, the technology that you put a name to, like 4K, 2K, or UHD, or 1,000 nits, or whatever. Numbers, people like that because it's simple. But the real progress, I think, happens at a different level, and the real challenge is at a different level. And it's much more mundane, much more boring, but it is also more important in terms of the economics of the whole process. What I'm talking about here is the ease of the workflow. We see in the consumer space how simple it has become to do really complex stuff using your mobile phone, using computers. And the professional applications, they lag behind that ease of use for a good reason, because you need much more control. You want to be able to change things just so and not have someone else suggest what they think might be the best solution. But there is a lot of catching up to do now that makes that process simpler, and a lot that can be done, but it requires cooperation amongst the vendors, and as I mentioned right at the beginning, this is quite a slow process. We're doing a demo here at our booth, which I find really interesting, which is about the color workflow from scene into post. And we all know that people like to shoot raw with their cameras because you get the high dynamic range and you get the flexibility to change things afterwards. But the price you pay at the moment is that you use a lookup table or something, or you look at the image in a way that isn't the way it's meant to be. Mm-hmm. And that is confusing to a lot of people because they like to see what they have in mind, and they also like to communicate the look they have in their head to the people in post-production. And so what you can do now is you can shoot raw, but you create on set the kind of look you want, sophisticated look. You pass the metadata through the camera into post-production, and in post-production the right look appears automatically without you having to do anything at all, but you still have all the flexibility of the raw format. It becomes an invisible raw workflow. Yeah. And it's that kind of ease of use that I think is absolutely critical for our industry to remain economical and competitive, and to really push the technology overall forward.
Now, something I'd like to ask all of you, with more and more global productions and collaborations between different post-production houses, New York, Sydney, Rome, wherever, both on feature films and commercials, have we got the technology to meet the demands? Because I can't remember, one of you was saying earlier that, some people are still shooting in SD, and not everyone is going to have 4K capability straight away. How do you see that happening in future, Robert? Do we have the technology for all these global collaborations?
Well, it happens today.
Yeah.
And I would say that almost everybody who's doing multi-point productions can give a very long list of difficulties that they have in doing that. It probably centers around moving data around through all those locations. It probably centers around calibration of display systems to make sure that one view of a piece of content in one area is matching the view of a piece of content in another area. And all those things, again, can be improved. But a lot of it in the improvement side has to do with disciplines and processes and tools and technologies. As an example, if you have a visual effects house in one part of the world who is using one type of colorimeter to calibrate their monitors, and they're using a type of monitor that has a different lighting system or different primary system than where their post house is, that might be compositing those or editing those. And they use a different device to calibrate their monitors. So they both think their monitors are calibrated, but because the systems and the devices are different, there could be quite a range of error in that. So, probably the best place where we can make the most immediate improvements is synchronizing process, procedures, and tools. And those things would eliminate a lot of the problems we have around display calibration, at least. When it comes to moving data around, I'll defer to our other guests here.
It is a challenge. It's a challenge to collaborate in a worldwide manner. But there are a lot of companies who are tackling this problem between actually moving the bits with Aspera and then also with tools for cloud storage that can improve the collaboration across a distance, or object storage, which has some geo-spreading capabilities as well. But yeah, it's we work in a worldwide collaborative environment, and then we also market into a world of consumers, and there's a lot of progress in that as well with formats like IMF that can really help us localize without being so inefficient, so you can really get the precise look and feel and sound for that market.
One of the things we're all worried about these days when it comes to moving data, whether it's, me putting some data on the internet versus a movie sending an enormous file, is security. Mm-hmm. When you're dealing with several post-production houses, is there any new security measures that have to be put in place to control the assets, if you like, and secure them?
Yeah, absolutely, security is an issue, and that's not Quantum's focus. But the interesting thing is, by having a worldwide delivery on the same day actually improves security. Even though you might be pushing it across the internet, at least it's not somebody physically in a cinema shooting.
Who's shooting it and then
and then sending it off to his cousin in
some market somewhere. Yeah,
some lower market that doesn't get first day delivery previously. So, so yeah, and I'm sure you guys, all your customers have heavy security requirements.
Yes.
Wolfgang, any comments on collaboration?
I just wanted to pick up on something that Robert said earlier about the display calibration, which is really, really an important issue. It sounds almost embarrassing to have to say that we're very ill-equipped to communicate how exactly one particular color is meant to look, and to know whether two people look at the same thing that are not in the same room. And I know of stories of visual effects companies who have sent people across the Atlantic to double check that actually what they've been looking at bears any resemblance to what they see themselves. And that is a completely ludicrous situation. And so to make that more straightforward and to absolutely understand that there is a proper way of setting the displays up so you can really be confident that it is the right thing is absolutely crucial. And for that, I think you need to really have a proper understanding of what can influence the environment. It might be the physical environment of the viewing theater. It might be the overall brightness of the display. It might be a whole number of things that I mean, the industry is obviously trying to standardize and trying to make that simple, but it is extraordinarily difficult to actually maintain that across the vast array of display technologies that are around today. And then on top of that, you have that situation that there isn't anymore the one standard delivery channel that you used to have, that was the cinema or was a broadcast monitor. Today you want to be able to look at things on any type of display, including your mobile phone. And to have consistency across those devices is a big challenge.
So we've talked a lot about the different technologies, the emerging technologies such as 4K and HDR. For the poor guys and girls working in post-production facilities, is the training adequate today for them to keep up? And if not, is there something that your companies are doing to help train?
You know, that's a great question, and I think in the age of the internet, the training that's available for those who have a thirst for understanding is there. Sure, you need to vet the source and make sure that the source of the training is giving you accurate and correct information. Yeah. But I started in this industry at a point where we had in our companies huge training centers where people would fly in from all over the world to sit for a week in front of the equipment and learn how to use it and learn how to do it. And that was a standard way to get people trained. Today, those people would never have to leave their offices, and it just provides a great way of getting this information out. And not only that, it democratizes who has the ability to create that information. So, you know, I know it's probably really hard for everybody to believe, but we don't always agree on things in this industry. And
really,
so
Robert?
it's sometimes good to be able to see, you know, what Wolfgang's opinion is about a certain workflow or a certain thing around high dynamic range versus what Rob Carroll's opinion is around high dynamic range in a certain workflow. And it might not be that either one of us are perfectly right in any given way, shape, or form, but there are different ways to solve the problem, and people should have access to that information. So, you know, do we do enough training? No, we don't. It's really tough to do that. It's something that's tough for people to pay for. It doesn't necessarily work in the ecosystem that exists today, but there's also the ability to get lots of training without a lot of cost, without a lot of travel, that was never there before. So I think it's a double-edged sword a little bit when it comes to the training issue.
How do you feel about that, Janet?
I don't have to deal with it much since we're kind of under the covers, but basically it just opens up a lot of opportunities, and we need these because the technologies are coming so fast. Getting everybody to come out for a training session a week a year, it's just not going to happen. And that's what makes this industry so exciting, is especially as costs go down in a lot of things and people can start up all kinds of new enterprises with a lot less capital than they needed before.
Yeah. What are your customers asking for at the moment? Like, what would you say is the biggest challenge that your customers are coming, or the problem, if you like, that your customers are coming to you with and saying, come on guys, figure out what we can do? Janet.
I think for a lot of our customers, it's the planning. It's like, how are these technologies going to impact? What do I need to, stand up a system that can handle 4K with HDR and high frame rates at the same time? It's also, because we're the platform, it's like, does it work with all the tools that I need? And just for them speccing it out. And often they come to us and they say, this is what I need, and this much storage, this much disk, whatever. And then we spend time working through and finding out, well, what are you really trying to accomplish? And so that's where we can really help them provide the value, because it's more than just post. It's, everything from ingest all the way to archive with delivery again and again and again because of the remonetization. And so things are changing rapidly, and they just need a consultant to help them.
Are there general problems, or are they really sort of house specific?
Oh, they're all special snowflakes, right? So, no, there are definitely some general problems, but everyone has their way of doing things, and that's not for us to impose, or for any of our tools so much to impose. It's really to work with them with the way they want to get it done.
And Robert, what sort of problems are customers coming to Dolby with?
I'd be interested to see if Wolfgang agrees with me, but I think one of the most difficult areas since the disappearance of the cathode ray tube has been consistent reference monitoring.
Yeah.
And it has been something that has been looked at and worked on by a lot of different people. One of the things that is difficult for the professional industry is that we are highly dependent right now on the same supply chain that supplies television sets, and they change their systems every 6 months. But we have to build a system that can work for 5 years consistently at a high level of quality. And when it comes to display technology right now, reference grade monitors, that is a very big challenge in our industry today. And with HDR, it adds to that challenge.
Yeah. And Wolfgang, see whether you agree with Robert.
I certainly agree with Robert that this is a specific problem that we all face. The industry is trying very hard to have forward-looking standards rather than lag behind. But for instance, as far as color gamut is concerned, we have Rec 2020, which has been defined in a way that makes it almost impossible to achieve without using lasers. So in terms of television sets, we have the manufacturer saying we need 80%, 85% of Rec 2020. That's a completely meaningless statement. And so perhaps rather than going to a point that is almost impossible to reach, it would have been better to define something more achievable or define an intermediate. These are issues that are difficult to solve, but...
Yeah. I'm going to have to stop you there. We are out of time, and I do hope you agree this has been a really enlightening conversation. I want to thank my guests, Robert Carroll from Dolby, Janet Lafleur from Quantum, and Wolfgang Lemp from Filmlight. I'm Janet West, and please join me tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, where I will be talking about 4K and HDR. Thanks for watching, and stay safe in Vegas.